stuck in the mail.
Hello, welcome to Stuck in the Mail, episode 20. Special episode here and a very special album. And I'm about to show Public Enemy. It takes a nation of millions to hold us back with a little bit of tape case glare there. And
On
they're
cassette.
on cassette. And hey, I noticed you have quite the cassette collection back there.
Oh yeah, my AI cassette collection. Shout out to whoever provided this free backdrop for me, since
Very nice.
my normal backdrop is unavailable right now. But you
Very
know
nice.
what? It's okay. We're gonna push on.
So, me being the album guy, the vinyl guy, the long play guy, not to mention the 45 guy, why do you think I chose to show this on cassette when I could just show this nice big glary 12 by 12 piece of art here? Any guesses?
Well, my guess is because it was the format of the time in '88. Is that right?
Yeah, yep, that's when the album came out.
And is it true? I've read that the album was designed to be like equal length for two sides of a cassette.
That I had not heard. This is more of a personal one for me. I mean, this was just an album that I listened to primarily on cassette and had on cassette in early college. I think probably my sophomore year. And it was just one of those. It's the reason why I love the cassette format for the car specifically is that it would just kind of be part of the car and would just play over and over and over and over again. You kind of know where you were about to hear when you got in your car next. There's something about the cassette format with the car. Uh,
Yeah.
Cassette at home is meaningless to me. And cassette, like Walkman, I was never a big guy, collect them. And I think cassettes are obviously cool, but for me, cassette equals car. And so this album equals cassette for me.
Yeah,
Um,
and the fact that you can't skip, it's going to loop back around. I
right,
mean, you
right.
you can. There's some technology with it, but generally speaking, you got to really love that tape because it's going to keep looping around.
It's got to be all good. No filler. And also, actually, like you just said there, it's a lot more like an album, like a record. There's no skip. This is pre-skip. So
Yep.
true analog. This is analog tape. But so to start us off here on this lengthy discussion, I'm going to just read the Wikipedia on "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back." Subtitle: "Freedom is a road seldom traveled by the multitudes," which I think is Frederick Douglass. So this is the second studio album by American hip hop group Public Enemy, released on June 28th, 1988 by Def Jam Recordings, Columbia Records. It was recorded from 87 to 88, blah, blah, blah. And now the good part. Noting the enthusiastic response towards their live shows, Public Enemy intended to make the album's music at a higher tempo than their 1987 debut, Yo Bum Rush the Show, for performance purposes. The group also set out to create whew, also set out to create the hip hop equivalent of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, an album noted for its strong social commentary. Now, that's an important issue. Through the production team, the Bomb Squad, Enemy introduced a densely aggressive sound influenced by free jazz, heavy funk, music concrete as a backdrop for lead rapper Chuck D, who employed socio-political rhetoric, revolutionary attitudes, and a dense vocabulary in his performances. It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back charted for 47 weeks on the US Billboard 200, peaked at number 42, and was certified platinum. The album received widespread acclaim from critics who praised its production techniques and Chuck D's socially political charged lyricism. It also appeared on many publications' year-end top album lists for 1988 and was the runaway choice as the best album of 1988 Village Voice Critics Poll, a poll of the leading music critics in the U.S. Since its initial reception, It Takes Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back has been regarded by music writers and publications as one of the greatest and most influential albums of all time. In 2000, it was voted number 92 in Colin Larkin's book, All Time Top 1,000 Albums. And in 2003, it was ranked number 48 on Rolling Stone's magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, the highest ranking of all the hip hop albums on the list, and the only one acknowledged to the top 100. In the 2020 version, the same list, the album was ranked number 15, while other hip hop albums moved into the top 100. Whew, I'm not so sure I'm happy that I read all that, but it's over. And so that gives a little background of how actually, no matter what you say, critically speaking, this is a critical darling
Yeah,
of.
this is an untouchable classic for
Hmm.
everybody.
Hmm.
I don't think you could find anyone who would not have this in their top 100 of a serious music fan.
Yeah. In that sense, because they say it's kind of like the what's going on. Didn't what's going on just become the Rolling Stones number one?
Yeah, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On was number one in the newest version, so the 2020 version.
I suppose one could speculate that this could potentially go higher. Um, that's an interesting thought to start us out on. Is that or start going into your thoughts on Public Enemy or just going into the album? I'll let you start. What was your listening experience like? And what was your experience with
Yeah,
the album?
well, I do think that this one will continue to rise in acclaim. I think that before too long, you're going to see it rated in the top 10 everywhere my opinion is that rap, or what would later become hip hop, is the music of the 21st century. That if rock and roll was the music of the 20th century, this is the era of hip hop, and that's a big topic. But if you're looking back at you know the classic of classics, that among those albums that started it all, I mean, this didn't start at all, but it was one of the first that really got that caught people's ear. Um, and so for me, I got into it in a roundabout way. um, I guess I knew that Public Enemy existed in 1988 when I was what 10 years old, but
Uh-huh.
it was not exactly part of like I think I knew some kids who listened to it, but it was definitely in the parental advisory forbidden zone.
Is it possible that your first listen to a song on this came through a metal remix, or maybe not?
It's entirely possible. I probably so good. I probably saw this at your house on MTV.
Possibly, possibly. I can't say. I mean, it probably was on what was it, Headbangers Ball or something, which I definitely
Mhm.
didn't watch as much as 120. But that that's a great starting point. I mean, not only is it essentially the first track on the album, Bring the Noise. Now that Anthrax album I just showed, which is Public Enemy and Anthrax performing Bring the Noise together, somewhat like a more seasoned version of Run DMC and Aerosmith. A true, I mean, Anthrax is the Public Enemy. That's the connection there. I can't remember what those SAT things are where you're like Aerosmith is to Run DMC is Anthrax is to who. So yeah, whatever that is, I'll just call it an analogy. But yeah, Bring the Noise. Apparently, Scott Ian of Anthrax loved the song. In that song, they say the word anthrax, and that was all it took to create the next great rock rap is what it would have been called at the time. Pairing, and this would actually lead to the Judgment Night soundtrack, which was all alternative bands like Sonic Youth and Dinosaur Jr. and all these groups with rap groups, and
Yeah.
it sounds funny now, and it was kind of funny then, but it way ahead of its time, like too ahead of its time.
Well, it's of course a classic opening track. I mean, I know it's the second track, but um, you know what's crazy though? Did you read when you were looking at this album? Did you read that originally the sides were flipped? That the album was up until mastering, it was supposed to start with "Show 'em What You Got" leading into Channel Zero.
Well, I mean, I completely believe that because there's five singles on this album, and a lot of my favorite songs are on side two. A lot of the great songs are towards the end of side two. So that would make sense to me, but not starting this out with the intro song, Countdown to Armageddon, which is just a clip of their live show. But it always completely reminds me of our next song is the first song on our new album, which, by the way, is Cheap Trick live at
Yeah.
Vodacom. But the Beastie Boys are sampling it, and I think they're doing it in nod to this because that's Check Your Head. So that is after this album. Because when this album was out, it was like Paul's Boutique era, to
Yeah,
name
and
check.
and of course, there's at least a couple of moments on Paul's Boutique where they're using the same samples as this. There's a moment where they sample Chuck D saying "They got me in a cell." it I can't remember which track on. It's like a really
Uh,
quick sample. They
oh, I
got
mean,
me in a cell.
oh, there's so many samples, but yes, I actually know the Paul's Boutique you're talking about. At first, I was like, no, that's just Chuck D, but uh, but yeah, yeah, they sample Paul's Boutique samples this.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah. For a minute there, I was okay. Yeah, I think the first thing I wrote when I was taking notes, and I've started notes for this a couple times, was there's 4,611 samples or sampled of this album. So we can't really talk about all those today, but I actually would like to just cut ahead while we're on the topic of thrash metal and rap working together here. You know, kind of the fringe genres of the late '80s. You know, because metal had gone past the hair metal phase. It wasn't quite grunge yet, but this was the time. '88 was the time when thrash metal was having its time. You know, Metallica and all that. These were the bands a lot out of San Francisco, like Exodus and stuff. These bands were really having their time, and Public Enemy caught a hold of that. And of course, the thing is about this album is it's produced by Rick Rubin. So Rick Rubin, of course, long-haired, now known as the Zen Guru, but at the time, long-haired metalhead. Had an album, had a record label out of his New York University dorm, and you know, Def Jam, of course, being abbreviated for DJ. He wasn't much of a DJ, but he was a producer and he was a visionary. And of course, with the Beastie Boys, you have um, you have Kerry King from Slayer, who was on Def Jam. So you got Rick Rubin's connection there. There's some more thrash metal connections. And the Beastie Boys had Kerry King play. He does the riff on "Fight for Your Right." He does the guitar solo on "No Sleep Till Brooklyn." And what happens here on this Def Jam album produced by Rick Rubin? We have "She Watches Channel Zero" with a sample, not playing, a sample of Slayer's "Angel of Death." You probably didn't know that one, right?
I think I did. I think I did. But yeah, it's quite a collab.
It's most people, I think I didn't know that one, and it's one of my favorite tracks. But when you hear it now, it's so easy to hear because it's like and that's the guitar riff. And then of course they have beats and crazy samples. And I
Well,
mean
and
this
I can kind of see why they might have planned for that to be the lead track, just because it probably felt really new and fresh, and they had this metal riff and everything. That was like going to be the showcase. But it's just
yeah,
crazy to me to imagine the album not starting,
yeah.
the way it does with what you call it, Bring the
Countdown to
Noise and
Armageddon.
Don't
Yep,
Believe the Hype.
yep. Yep. I mean those, and then of course, hey, we're on to tracks already. We're doing pretty good. Let's talk about I want to talk about Cold Lampin' with Flavor, but at the same time, I want to talk about the dichotomy of rap at this time and how it hadn't quite gone into like, you know, the era of I'm gonna call it you know, Afrocentrism, like De La Soul and that kind of stuff. But this is an era that's really important because this is a harder era that would like eventually birth later on. It would birth this album's practically falling apart. It would birth NWA on the West Coast, and then back in New York again, in the Bronx, I believe, would birth Wu-Tang. Uh, but you know, this era, it's not like Run DMC or this era of the Beastie Boys, Licensed to Ill. It's not like Chuck D is the rapper here, you know. Terminator X is the DJ. Flavor Flav, this is where I'm bringing him in, is the sidekick, not unlike what would become, say, Snoop Dogg to Dre on the West Coast.
Yeah,
Um, you know, they're with the Beastie Boys or Run DMC, they're always like completing each other's lines, you know, this or that. They have this interplay of back and forth. But with Public Enemy, Chuck D is kind of the rapper, you know. He
yeah.
does predominantly most of the rapping.
Well, and the magic of this is that you have that dynamic, that you have the hard mixed with the court jester, like the
The headline.
humor of Flavor Flav. That you have the fact that you have both in one, that's what makes it so appealing. Um, there are a lot of classic rap albums that have different personnel and different groups with different, but like with the Beastie Boys, when I think of them, I think of three guys who are essentially, you know, I guess Ad Rock is a little more cartoonish at times, but in general, they're kind of the same. Like I think of like most groups around that time, it was I think that's what sets Public Enemy apart is that you have not just those guys, but you also have the Bomb Squad and you have the rest of the group. But you have those distinct personalities. You have Chuck D, who is the bringing the I guess the political statements. You have Flavor Flav, who's over here making you laugh, and then you have Terminator X. It just that's that
Yep.
they each have their own lane, which is what makes it so brilliant.
Right. Well, I know we're going to bring up the Beastie Boys too much in this, but I'm sorry. Like, for example, the Beastie Boys, they didn't even have a name DJ till like after Check Your Head. And, their first DJ was Rick Rubin. I mean, that would perform live, and of course it was very simple. And the thing with hip hop that most people don't understand, and, I've some experience DJing, and technology has changed DJing so many times that when you have something that's very simple and routine that you need to create using samples, using breaks of the beginnings of records, you know once you have a machine that records that and loops it and plays it and sequences it, why do you do that on stage? Well, the quick answer is that you don't. You stand there and pretend because, for one, it might be very complex to actually do that. It's tough working with vinyl. It's tough working with needles. It's tough working with heavy records and crates and stuff. Like how the DJing world progressed was extremely quick. And I think we touched upon this the other day that things did go back and forth in rap, in hip hop between, this is all about the MCs. This is all about the DJ. Like the DJ then all of a sudden moves so far ahead that the MCs just kind of seem like, oh, you're just still talking on a mic. Like that's it. That's all you're doing. You're just rhyming. So it is this is a good starting point to discuss hip hop, rap. I use the two interchangeably, especially here. I use rap because, man, this was for the kids out there watching, the younger audience. We thank you for sticking with a couple old men here talking about stuff. But in this era, in the 80s, there was only rap.
Mhm.
And it was not well appreciated. And I think somehow Public Enemy, through their name and through everything they did here, kind of like snuck in, because Flavor Flav became like a Snoop Dogg. I mean, he's so loved. He had 3 hit VH1 love shows where he dated Red Sonja or whatever. I mean, the guy's a legend. He plays 15 instruments. I had a whole bunch of notes on him. He
Oh
learned
yeah, he's
he learned piano at 5 years old. He's actually a very talented musician, like
yeah, and
actual.
he's very lovable and he's very memorable and he has a kind of persona that the average person who's not even a rap or hip hop fan knows who Flavor Flav is, which is a big deal.
Yep. And that brings us to Cold Lampin' with Flavor.
Oh, good, best track on the album.
Yeah, I mean it's memorable. I think I really wanted to do, I don't want to rap it per se, but I wanted to do a little bit of some lyricism here.
Are you going to
Uh
give us a dramatic reading?
it's so impossible to even read. Like it's fun to follow along when you hear it, but it's just unbelievable. We got Magnum Brown, Shusky Palushki, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. You can put that in your don't know what you said book. Took, look, yuk, duck, wook. Innovative little flavors by the Flavor Flav. Come and ride the flavor wave. Any year, a given day. What a brother know? What a flavor say? What a record play that way? Prime time, merrily in the day. Right now in the. Whew, I
Well,
mean,
and you didn't even
it's
get to
insane.
my favorite part is where he talks about a graveyard and then gravy, and he just goes. It
But
has to
great.
be ad lib, right? Like this song has to be ad lib.
Yes, I think that it's pretty safe to say at this time, when I was doing some of my lyrics for Hideous Kids, I was looking at this kind of odd meter. You know what I mean?
I do.
On a
I do.
personal note here, uh, one day we'll discuss. But
But
yeah,
even just, this is the question I have. Maybe people who know who know more about this group can chime in. But I've always wondered how much of this is written out and how much of this, especially Flavor Flav's, interjections, how much of that is improvised. Because he'll do his thing where he's like Captain Kirk and the jerk, and he's out of work, and I'm like, that has to be just off the cuff, and it's hilarious and brilliant and amazing.
oh yeah. I don't think that Flavor Flav writes down his lyrics or initially wrote them down. He's a like ODB from Wu-Tang. He's an old dirty bastard because he's fatherless to no style or whatever they say. And actually, I actually looked that up, uh, and I discovered that old dirty bastard is Flavor Flav's cousin. So no
Well,
no shock there. It's a
and
deep
he just
cut.
he just has a way of I mean, his phrases are so memorable, like "face in your face," "Cold Medina." I
Yeah.
mean, the whole album is just filled with them, and that's how like even the name of the album, like half of the stuff that's on this album is referencing things on their first album.
Yeah.
These little phrases, that they just take with them.
Yeah, boy. You
That's
mean
pretty
that one?
good.
That's the number one. That's the number one flavor.
Did you have you listened to the first album?
Oh yeah, I have a copy of it. I don't like it as much. It's a bit, it's more intense. I mean, it's called Yo Bum Rush the Show, and it was about an actual technique that I guess Public Enemy uh actually used, which was like just get on stage and start doing it. And at a hip hop show, if there is just a DJ and mics, I mean, technically speaking, you can just jump on stage and be like, well, you guys are whack, so we're gonna play. It's not like I mean, you could do the same. I'm sure there's instances of it, but you can't just like use someone's like guitar.
Yeah.
It is different in hip hop, and hip hop has that battling element where it's like, oh, you're no good, so get off the stage. So uh, I think apparently that was just something that Public Enemy did in the early days. I read up on their early meeting, and I guess, oh man, they all have really funny names, like real names. I can't remember any of them right now. But you got you got Chuck D's real name? I think it's Carlton Douglas
Ridenour.
Riddenhauer. Yeah, they always have really nerdy names, like poor Snoop Dogg. He's Kelvin. I'm like, oh man.
Yeah, isn't Flavor Flav like William Drayton?
Yeah, William Drayton. Probably a funny middle name too, like Aloysius or something. But apparently, Chuck D, we're gonna go by the popular names here. Chuck D and Flav. Apparently, Flavor came onto his radio show. So that's how they started being like, oh, okay, well, and I can only assume that Chuck D was playing, I would assume hip hop, rap. Um,
Well, talking about the placement of these songs on the album, it's just so perfectly done because you have these absolute classics, Bring the Noise, Don't Believe the Hype.
yep.
Then you get to hear Flavor Flav's feature, and then you're just like, I can't take it anymore because it's just so much. The assault on the senses with the
Yes.
production is so fantastic. And then and when you think about what they had to do to create those soundscapes back then, and then it's
Oh
so
yeah.
great because then all of a sudden you get the Terminator X feature, and so it gives you a second to breathe. And
Hmm.
I just really appreciate the sequencing of this, that they
Yeah,
have these
the
instrumental tracks that kind of break it up.
the Terminator X one is really great because it shows off some of at what the time would be really spectacular DJing. It doesn't feel that way now when you like kind of break down what he's doing, but there's that big air siren, and then next thing you know, he's sampling the Flash song by Queen, and it just sounds so amazing, simply cut up, just like that was probably a
Well, and isn't
I
this
heard the beat in my head and I was doing the Flash part. But yeah, it's Queen. It's Flash, Flash Gordon soundtrack.
uh-huh. And
That'll
isn't this the one where they have the grunt, the JB song, where they have that one in reverse, and of course it comes back later on the other single. You know what I'm talking about.
it is the grunt. Yep, I have it written down.
On
Uh,
Rebel Without a Pause. So, and on Rebel Without a Pause, it's going, and on the Terminator X Edge of Panic, it's going.
I think my favorite thing about this album is all the sirens and the annoying sounds,
Yes.
the kind of sounds that would be replicated with a lot of success by House of Pain, Jump Around, and the really big one is Cypress Hill, Insane in the Brain, where you have those little like twills and little like
Yeah. Well, and how about the fact
firework.
that there's that I guess they call it the transformer. What do they call it? Transformer scratch. It's the same thing that's later in Sabotage, to bring it back to the Beastie
Mhm.
Boys. Is that I forget which track it is on this album, but there's one where I'm like, oh, there it is. There's the Sabotage. So I just love how referential they are to each other. Like these are artists who respect each other, who are doing this as a nod to each other. It's not meant to rip each other off. This is a collaborative art form. They even get into that on um can we get a witness about the copyright
Yeah, there's
question.
there's a whole song about that. And Chuck D, of course, was at the trials in 2003 or whatever about piracy, and he, of course, was on the side of free sharing,
Yeah.
pro Napster, which all looks kind of a little funny now in the age of Spotify, but where you have essentially one monopoly kind of going. But let's not get into that. It let's cut to the last track because I gotta say, when I was in my car, I lived for She Watched Channel Zero. Didn't know it was Slayer, but I gotta say, I always thought "Party for Your Right to Fight" was amazing, and it has to be a Rick Rubin like attempt to get the kind of "Party for Your Right." Uh, I'm sorry, I even said that wrong. You gotta fight for your rights to party.
Yeah,
It,
it does feel like it has Ruben's fingerprints on it.
Oh my gosh. I mean, but like how could that become popular? Because how long prior was uh Fight for Your Right to Party? It's so impossible to say those two titles and not mix them up. Go
Yeah, that
ahead.
was like wasn't that 86 License to Ill?
Yeah, and this is 88. Yep. And gosh, I think I brought even some more albums.
Well, we got to talk about we can't skip all the way to the end. We got to talk about a couple of my favorites here.
Yeah.
Um
I definitely got more.
I think my maybe third favorite track on the album. Like, so if my favorite is gonna be Cold Lampin' with Flavor, second's got to be Bring the Noise, and then I got to go with Black Steel and the Hour of Chaos. Like that one uh,
Fifth
is,
single. That was a single. There's a video. I'm serious.
and you know how this is so crazy to me. I had never heard this album before, and guess how I heard this song for the first time? Do you remember
Uh,
that version of it that by
is it this?
Tricky?
Is it this? Because this is the main sample on Black Steel. This is Isaac Hayes' Hot Buttered Soul, his absolute best album.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, no, I'm talking about I first heard this song, Black Steel and the Hour of Chaos, from Tricky, as in
okay.
the trip hop artist. Remember he had a
Oh
cover
yeah.
of it?
Yeah, I do. Wow. Yeah.
And so then I get around to this and I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Oh, trip hop. Yeah, that's an interesting. I'm a big Portishead guy, but and I guess to some extent Massive Attack and Tricky, but that what England did essentially by getting into American hip hop is really fascinating.
yeah.
That era that we were just, listening to Radiohead or listen, I was listening to the Bends, having no idea that it would go so digital.
Well,
Uh,
and we also have to talk about another favorite. Maybe this is my fourth favorite is Night of the Living Bassheads. The
yes.
production on that one, unbelievable. The way you have this looping
Froze for a second.
saxophone
Yep.
thing, and then it cuts out for an 8 count, and then it's boom right back in.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And a lot of people, I don't think a lot of people consider Public Enemy like a, you know, a negative group or something. But the nice thing about this track is that it's an anti-crack cocaine epidemic song.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, there's lots of positive messages on this album, but it's the one of the songs that comes through purest as, it also really feels like what would be, George Bush era, those 4 years. It has that feel.
Uh-huh.
And I think that when I think about the influences of Public Enemy, I think the biggest thing is NWA because the West Coast took this and they
Yeah.
made it so harder and not in a good way, but I'm just saying they took this and really ran with it. Now, NWA Straight Outta Compton came out in 88 actually. So these guys were into Yo Bum Rush the show. So this message and this album had not yet reached the West Coast because it didn't exist. But NWA, which of course was really pervasive, really underground, and at the same time produced rap's only billionaire and many other very wealthy hip hop artists like Ice Cube. And one tragedy, but that's the thing is without Chuck D and Flavor Flav, there's no NWA.
Yeah.
It is impossible not to think that. And I remember when I was a kid in the 80s, NWA was a big no-no. And it's nice that they're so appreciated now. And that
Uh-huh.
album, even though, very you know, very heavily controversial, let's just leave it at that, has gotten the actual credit for hip hop nods that it deserves.
Yeah, totally.
100%.
I mean, this album, what can you say? You look at the track list, there's nothing even average on it. It
No.
is elite, in every way. It's the skill, it's the political, activism, it's the humor, it's the production, the soundscapes here, the samples, like it just is
On your
a
favorite song there.
what's that?
Night of Living Bassheads has the most samples on this album. It's 20.
I
So
believe it. That's what I love about it. I'm just
uh,
in awe of it. It's like listening to I mean, it is a virtuoso performance in every way. The production alone is enough to just, knock you over.
there's very few albums we're going to go to hip hop now, uh, that are in this special little era before the evil music industry was like, nope, we want pennies for that and pennies for that and pennies for that. And it is literally Paul's Boutique, which they got away with murder. And then this,
Yeah,
and,
you
and
think?
yeah, and then De La Soul, 3 Feet High and Rising. And there's just not a lot of albums where you can hear hundreds of albums on the album and just be
Yep.
like, like for example, I wanted to bring this earlier, but when Beck came out with Mellow Gold, there's all styles on that album. And of course, when he was working and doing shows in LA, he was rapping a lot. And one of his big things with Loser, which was just kind of a B-side throwaway, is he was trying to rap like Chuck D. He's been quoted several times as saying, I was trying to match Chuck D's cadence, his rhythm, his
Yeah.
how he was. And then I would argue with Flavor Flav's lyrical content, just kind of random. But that album and more so the well-produced Odelay, they were trying to put this amount of samples in it, but they couldn't at the time. Like I remember Beck, like Odelay, they even with the big money backing, they couldn't afford the samples. So he had to get rid of all these samples.
Is that right?
He was late. He was late. He was late to the game. He was literally 4 years late.
Well, and you're absolutely right that the Beastie
Years
Boys
late.
got away with murder with that. I mean, they sampled the Beatles very prominently
Yes.
on Paul's
Yep.
Boutique. But
Yep.
you think about De La Soul. When I was going through the top 500 albums, I couldn't even listen to that. It was the one album I couldn't even
Yeah.
listen to the whole thing because it's so many different vignettes and skits and whatever. I
Yeah.
couldn't find them all, even on YouTube.
Yeah.
Thankfully, now it's on Spotify again. But like we were listening today to the song "I Know," the one that samples "Peg" by Steely
Yeah.
Dan, and I'm like, it's the hoops they have to jump through because under the artist it says De La Soul and Otis Redding, and I'm like, Otis Redding. It's because they
What?
do the whistle from sitting on the dock of the bay.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah, it's
now
like
he's
Spotify's
credited.
nightmare.
He's credited as the artist for that song.
Wow. See, that's the thing is that, I mean, we can make 1,000 arguments, but let's go back to the first thing we said on this actual podcast that you're listening to right now. And that is that rock music is from the 20th century. Hip hop, and we're going to use the word hip hop here, recycled music is from the 21st century. And it's because if you play guitar or you know rock music, you know that it's all been written. The combinations,
Yeah,
close, but for the most part, they've all been used, The good ones, there's only so many notes. There's 7 notes, right? Major notes. Oh, now I better not talk about music theory.
there's seven
So
white keys.
white keys. Okay, good. Yes, and we got the black keys too, the minor keys, but the actual notes. So with the 21st century, it's all about recycling music, and that's what hip hop started to do. And right away, it didn't hold back to using anything, anything
Yep.
that could be used. And we're still in that era of where it's super locked down.
Yeah.
Uh, there was Napster where it was like, let's share using the computer. And they're like, no, let's not do that. And then you have YouTube where it's like, put anything out. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, but you can't use it in what you make. Like Mike and I can't play clips of the stuff we're talking about, which would be super nice. So everyone could be on the same page.
Well,
Uh,
and now the technology, it couldn't be easier to loop
yeah.
something, but you
Oh, yeah.
can't do it. You have to clear the sample, and
Yeah. What would be extremely difficult using 2 turntables or whatever, what Grandmaster Flash created way back in the day with the merry-go-round, where we would take 2 copies and literally loop, uh, you know, creating a beat, which seems insane. And it isn't, it's a lot of work. You could just do on your cell phone by pressing a button when the part starts, pressing a button when it stops, pressing that button to play it, and then doing it with another song, creating a beat. You can do that with all kinds of things. And we're
so
not
I have a
talking
question.
about
I've got a question for you, Casey. So according to Rolling Stone, our friends, the number two song of all time is none other than a song. It's not on this album, but it is on the following album, "Fight the Power."
yeah, yeah.
Your thoughts? Do you feel like that's the best
Um,
Public Enemy song of all time?
well, it just so happens I have whenever I'm looking over here, it's my other screen with Spotify up at the moment. But I actually was pretty surprised by the most plays because it was something new, harder than you think. It's like '09 or something.
Hmm.
Yeah, but Fight the Power. I'm not as much of a Fear of a Black Planet guy as I am It Takes a Nation of Millions. It's a good album. It's not as chock full of awesome stuff. It does have its places. Um, but yeah, I mean, Fight the Power was in Spike Lee's movie, and I'm drawing a huge blank right now. Help me out. Uh, Do the Right Thing.
Do the right thing.
So yeah, I mean, Fight the Powers, it's a great song.
It's got some pretty iconic. To me, it kind of is the best of everyone's contributions. I can see why it's regarded the way it is. It's
Yeah.
kind of a shame that it's not on this one, just because as an album, this one is,
Well, I
untouchable.
I think actually my real true introduction to Public Enemy, I don't even think it was Bring the Noise. I think it was the first single off Fear of Black Planet, which is the oddly titled 911 is a joke because it had this hilarious video, and I remember that video, and I remember Flavor Flav
Yeah.
because he does a lot of the rapping on it, and I just remember loving it and being like, "Wow, this is really kooky." But I was 9 or 10.
Yeah. Sometimes I think about like if we had been born 5 years earlier, like
Sure.
it just so happened that we came of age and started getting into music during grunge, but I wonder like would we have been into these like rap rock hybrids? Like, I don't know.
Coming from like rural Northern California, probably not. But at the same time, when that stuff does leak in, it's that much cooler. And I did like, numerous things when I was really young. Like we liked Boys to Men, and I remember
Yeah.
Heavy D, and like uh I remember thinking the Run DMC Aerosmith thing was really cool, and I certainly didn't think Aerosmith was cool. They seemed old and weird. I'd often get them confused with the Rolling Stones. I was like, well, he has a big mouth, and this guy has a really big mouth, and he's really creepy and old.
It's all true.
It's very true. Controversial topics here. But yeah, I mean, I guess Public Enemy's still doing stuff. I actually saw Chuck D in some weird Public Enemy iteration, and it was really good. It was in Seattle. It was almost like a rock thing. I can't remember anything about it, but I've
I
seen Chuck D. I've
it's
seen
fun
parts
when
of it.
it's fun when he pops up doing cameos too. Like I
Yeah.
went on a really deep dive of Prince at one point, and he has a cameo on a Prince song that I'm like, why was this not more popular? It's a great Prince like pop song, and then Chuck D's verse is just classic. It's his cadence. It's his famous. No one else could do it. You know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hey, and don't forget Cool Thing by Sonic Youth.
oh yeah, you're right.
Can't forget that one because, just like I said earlier, the burgeoning what would become alternative scene really like Public Enemy. I remember the accolades that Public Enemy got, even back then when we were listening to grunge and stuff, like Public Enemy, they were a popular group amongst musicians. People
Yeah.
liked what they were doing.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the quality was evident. I mean, the fact that what you started with, I mean, this album was popular. This album was critically acclaimed from the start.
yes.
It wasn't like something that people rediscovered later. I mean, this was and always has been one of the best ever.
Yep, yep. I think we could ramble a lot more about it, and I'm struggling to make sure I've hit all my notes, but as usual, I haven't looked at them, and it's just awkward. But I think that's a great place to stop. I mean, we could talk all day about how great this album. I would keep coming up with stuff.
Yeah,
So
so hey, all you kids out there,
check it
if you
out.
if you haven't heard it yet,
Now
run, don't
available.
walk.
Now
Go
available.
go to your local record store and pick up that tape today.
That's their logo. And they also go by PE, which is a little bit of a funny abbreviation. It's like, oh, PE time.
All right, is it time
You
for me
got
to
Mike.
talk about my next one? Okay, you
Is it Shaft? Is it
that would be cool. Let me reach into my backdrop and pull
oh,
out
it's the
the
police?
police. Which
Nice.
album is? No, it's okay. Uh, so I had something lined up. I'll save it for next time because you convinced me. It's time to talk. It's time to pick a Dylan album and talk about a Dylan album. Longtime viewers of this podcast will
Yes.
know that
Yes.
Dylan is my number one artist, and so it's going to be hard for me to keep it concise, but I'm going to try. But yeah, I think the '60s has been covered. Um, there's a lot to talk about that's maybe more interesting to me to talk about in, say, like the '90s or the album that I have chosen for today. And yes, it's on CD and it's hidden. This
Also
is
can't
terrible.
see it. Put it in
There it
front of
is.
your shirt.
Bob Dylan, Love and Theft from
Nice.
2001. Um, yeah, this is, to me, Bob's had Dylan has had an uneven career. It's safe to say. Some of his stuff is probably still underrated because it's just that genius. Um, but he's had some peaks and valleys, and let me tell you, the turn of the century was a real peak for Mr. Bob Dylan. This album has something special, and I would say it is right up there with his very best. If he's got 6 or 7, 10 out of 10 albums, this is going to be one of them. So I don't know if you know this album very well, Casey.
I've heard it a couple times.
All right. So Love and Theft coming up hot and
Cool.
fresh on the pod.
Awesome. I don't have it on vinyl.
That would be tough to find, I think.
Yes. All right. Awesome.
Thanks, Casey. See
Take
y'all
care.
later.
All right.